everybody. So I'm a little old school and I have some notes. I will use them. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Sally. I wanted to start a little bit with a brief bio of who Sally is. Sally Buzbee has spent almost 30 years at the AP before she joined the Washington Post. And she has had a career in different levels of a newsroom. She started as a reporter, became a correspondent, grew from position to position, bureau chief, worked in different parts of the world, and then was promoted as a bureau chief of Cairo, did that, and then eventually was promoted again, moved to Washington, D.C., during very tumultuous times in the news and also in the newsrooms. And in her personal life, she did all of that work really gracefully. I think in her personal life, she had your husband was going through cancer and eventually passed away, and raising two children while taking new leadership positions that are different from the other. So she has worked in different capacities and grown from position to position before she arrived at the Washington Post. At the Washington Post, she has inherited, a newsroom that is fast growing from, I think, around 80 just a couple of years ago. In the 80s, the staff has grown to 1,000 plus, growing globally around the world and in different new locations, as well as working around the clock, around 24 hours news cycle. So, and in that, I think Sally has also expanded the coverage on technology, what we're going to talk about today a little bit, and climate change, health, all of that. So, I did want to start, just talking to you a little bit about, having that career as a leader in the newsroom, and maybe a little bit also being a female leader.
I think just like anyone else, you grow as you have experience. The best thing in journalism is to work with great people, to learn from them, and certainly to me, for example, working internationally was like a critical moment in my career development. I learned to be more autonomous. I learned to, trust myself more. I learned to be able to make decisions, things like that. So I think, experiences like that. In terms of being a woman, being the first woman in this job, I'm always very keenly aware that people opened doors in the past. You look back at everything from the lawsuits of the 70s, the people who pioneered some of these jobs. And so I'm always very aware that people open doors for me. And I do feel a responsibility to ensure that those doors keep opening up for more journalists of color, for more women, for a larger group of diverse people in our newsrooms. We focus on diversity a lot in hiring. We focus on it a lot in terms of internal promotion, making sure that our editors are also a diverse group of people, because that's going to impact how our newsroom works, the stories that we think that are important. And so I think to me it's less of a issue that kind of sits up here, and I try to just integrate it into just my day-to-day life, my day-to-day work.
Excellent. So since we're at a technology conference, let's also talk a little bit about technology, internet, how that's changing journalism. The Washington Post is one of the most powerful newspapers in the world, but it's also one of the leading powerful mainstream newspapers that has done a really good job making strides in digital platform, as a digital platform. A lot of the news goes out digitally. Technology and innovation has changed journalism. It's changing journalism, how we do our job, how we deliver that job, as well as how it's received. And some of the few things are, artificial intelligence, how that's changing things, podcasting, social media, data journalism, blockchain as a means to counter fake news and all of that. So all of these tools, how do you think that technology and journalism has impacted how journalists work and do their job?
So I think, there's kind of two ways to look at this. I think that, first of all, the act of reporting is obviously aided enormously by the new tools that we have. I think of this something just as simple as coverage of Ukraine, which is obviously dangerous, it's obviously complex, your access in some cases is limited. In a place like Ukraine, we really use what I would call the most old-fashioned boots on the ground, nothing beats eyewitness accounts, and so you're using the best of traditional journalism and traditional reporting, and you're really mixing that with the most innovative tools that you can find, whether that's drone photography, whether that's surveillance photography, whether that's people with very in-depth knowledge and sources about what is happening in the world of money moving around the world and things like that. And you also just need it's a process of ensuring that the values and the approach that you take to getting credible information remains the same, remains old-fashioned and credible, but that the tools that you use to find that information, to verify that information are cutting edge. And so it's not, not everyone, a newsroom evolves, new skill sets are needed over time. We need to have people who can actually, and this is happening all across journalism, that they can verify. How do you figure out that a piece of social media video is correct and not a fake and not from a different time, not from something that happened before? And that sort of learning, which I think is part of what we, as people who lead newsrooms, we are trying to constantly ensure that we are on the cutting edge of how to ascertain what is credible information. In terms of presentation, I kind of view it the same way. I think that we are, I always say that we want to be incredibly old-fashioned in our values and our reliance on facts matter, but we also want to be incredibly cutting-edge and modern in terms of how we actually tell our stories. The storytelling is critically important to journalism, making information compelling. We also want it to be accurate, we want it to be factual, but we want it to not be boring, we want it to be compelling. And that's where modern storytelling comes in. And across our newsroom, it's everything from what's the proper use of video, what are we doing on social media, what are we doing on our homepage, what are we doing in print? Like, what are we actually print, both in terms of a print paper, but also in text digitally. Are we telling stories in the most accessible way, in the ways that people actually consume news right now? And I think, to me, it's very exciting to learn from our readers, to learn from the people who consume our journalism. We're trying to create that's a positive in our newsroom, to learn how people actually want to consume journalism. If we learn from that, we can sort of iterate and sort of create that next generation of journalism, always grounded by this belief in factual journalism. I think the one thing that we don't want to do is give the purveyors of disinformation the advantage in terms of storytelling. We want that advantage to stick with the people who actually believe in facts. That's very strongly baked into our mission.
Thank you. And you just, the Washington Post just also won the Pulitzer Prize. And I think the reporting, if you can talk a little bit about innovation and how do you, an example of how the storytelling has changed.
Mm-hmm. So, this is a very simple example, obviously. Let me give two because I think they're really interesting. In the material that won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service this year, it was about a deep look into what had happened in January 6th at the Capitol. And one of my favorite parts of it, it was navigable, so you could actually sort of, click on various parts of the story. It talked about before January 6th, during January 6th chronologically, and then what had happened afterwards. I loved that ability to kind of navigate around, and we could see that readers were doing that they were going to various parts that were interesting to them. One of the things I loved was we talked about, and it was not very well known, it actually came out in the hearings yesterday, but that a lot of local election officials got very severe and very toxic threats after January 6th. And we had some material that our reporters had gathered that were actually, the voicemails that a local election official had gotten on her phone or had gotten on his phone. And we interspersed that into the story. So you're reading about this. Don't trust us. Listen to this. Listen to this voicemail that someone got. Click on this. Listen to the audio. And I think that sort of real-time immersive storytelling has power. And I think that's very interesting. I loved a piece that we did a couple weeks ago about what the city of Shanghai in China was actually like during the lockdown. It included a lot of video that we gathered from social media that showed people who were so frustrated at being locked in their houses, literally screaming from a skyscraper in the middle of the city. It showed a little robot walking down a street, sending messages to people that they had to stay indoors. There was a piece of social media video that showed a man who was sort of being detained by public health officials in white suits, and how he had fought back against that detention. And I think, and it also, it combined the story, the text story, with these visual elements. And to me, it was one of the most powerful things that I had ever seen about what it is actually like to live in a city that is totally locked down, to the extent that you cannot sometimes get food for your animals. There were dying cats on the street, things like that. And it was a way to actually deeply report what was happening in a city that is very, honestly closed off to independent reporting from outside. I was really proud of that piece. I thought, like, that sort of storytelling, which is coming from our smart journalists, they're inventing this as we go. That makes me so excited about the future of what we do.
Communicating to the reader,
yes, exactly,
and getting them on in the scene. Thank you. Excellent. So, let's talk about diversity and inclusivity in the newsroom. Sally, when you started your career in the 80s, there was very little diversity in the newsroom, from top down and bottom up. I started my career in 1999, and there was very little diversity anywhere in the world. A lot has changed, in the recent years. It took a long time for women to be in managerial positions and top positions, and that journey has been long. But there has been infrastructural changes in newsrooms that have brought that about. Of course, Black Lives Matter and Me Too has contributed a lot. And in the recent past few years, we're seeing a lot of inclusivity. I think organizations and anywhere, in any industry are improvising, and the media, journalism organizations are also improvising. And there's a lot more diversity in newsrooms now in terms of seeing more women, people of color, people from diverse backgrounds. But then I think that has also caused a cultural sort of shift in newsrooms, or generally organizations that may find it hard to handle. It's like everything happening all at once. When you have a lot of new people, there are new challenges, they're asking for new questions, new things, etc. And so that cultural shift can be difficult to manage. Certainly the Washington Post has gone through, seen some of that before you joined and after you joined. I have a lot of friends who have worked with you at the AP and the Washington Post, and I always hear that you are a good listener, and you listen and you care about what people want to say, their ideas in terms of work, also what they want to suggest as changes. So, when we're talking about diversity and inclusivity, I guess I want to ask, what do you think, how do you, make sure that there's inclusivity in your newsroom, in terms of hiring and all of that? And then the second part is also, how do you ensure that when people share their ideas or concerns, that they are heard?
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. I think, first of all, to me, it's just a very practical matter. Our job is to actually reflect what is, accurately reflect what is happening in the world. And we need to have the most diverse group of journalists and also news managers that we can possibly have in order to ensure that we are actually reflecting that world, that we're not missing viewpoints, that we're not missing important things that are happening, that we are actually clued into all parts of the world. So I think that that's just sort of a practical matter. We spend a lot of time on hiring. We spend a lot of time, I think, on internal career development. Right now, journalism is also, there's young journalists who are bringing incredible richness and understanding of digital storytelling and the way the world is now, how the world communicates. They're bringing that to our newsrooms. Sometimes we don't all see the world the same way, but I think if you can create a place where you can have those conversations, and you can actually, newsrooms need to be somewhat messy and robust places. They need to be places where conversations can happen. They need to be places where people can debate ideas, because that is actually how we come up with the journalism that we need to do. We obviously want to create, environments where people can do their work. They can do their work fruitfully. They can do their work productively. They feel secure. They feel supported. And then we also want to, create some space where we can. We have to be able to talk about. We cover some of the most contentious issues that happen in our world, and we have to be able to talk about those and bring diverse viewpoints into our conversation so that we can cover those stories fully. And that includes, the whole spectrum, for example, of partisan thought in the United States. It includes the whole spectrum of international coverage, and that's what we're trying to do, is kind of create that sort of supportive but challenging type of newsroom.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And when you have diverse newsrooms, you have diverse storytelling, and you're including all of the public. We have very little time, and I wanted to touch a little bit on misinformation and press freedom, which are kind of connected. Misinformation, disinformation is kind of growing, and press freedom is becoming one of the key challenges. How do you handle that at the Washington Post?
I think we try to fight very hard for access. We try to fight hard for access for ourselves, for other people. I do think one of the things that the world needs to pay attention to is the idea that, if there is restricted access to places, you're not going to get as good of information. You're not actually going to find out what's going on. And so I think that well beyond journalism, there is actually sort of an imperative to push for the free flow of information across the world. It may not solve all of our problems, but it is actually one thing that has a much better chance of actually creating the conditions where people can determine their own futures, determine what they want to do. And so I think that the idea that press freedom is just something that journalists care about, I think a larger part of civil society actually should understand that that free flow of information is really critical to the societies that we hope exist around the world.
Yes, and from my perspective, because I run a press freedom organization focused on gender, I think that it is becoming a public issue. It's spreading widely, and hundreds of journalists get targeted every month. Anyways, thank you so much, Sally.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
everybody.
it. Take care. Bye-bye.